This is a story about how an almost criminal teenager became a doctor by 25. Now, there are many stories of me being a nuisance to both my family and school. I don't want you to think I'm encouraging anything I did. I'm trying to show you that where I came from, you can still succeed later. Strap in, because it's about to get bumpy. I'll give you the full story and how I was able to change my life so dramatically, but first I've got to give you some context that is really important to understand all of this. Alright, so here's me. Born in Australia to immigrant parents from Pakistan, my mum and dad weren't doctors, and they worked incredibly hard to make a life for me and my brothers. As a kid, I was very curious. I wanted to know why the sky was blue and why birds always knew where to fly without direction. So I fell in love with science. I became an average student, dumb in most ways, smart in some, until I hit high school where I was surrounded by academically smart kids and fell into what we call being a dropkick. For those of you who aren't Australian, that basically means you were dumb. But this was also some of the best years of my life. My friends and I would play video games, cause a ruckus in class, and constantly be getting into trouble.
So, you got detention.
Basically everything but learn in school. My best friend in high school was a genius, so he would let me copy his answers, and then I would roll up the answers and stuff it into a little pen, and then pass that pen around to all my other friends so we could all pass the test. We had found a way to cheat on tests. One day I got a report card with the most shocking grades you can imagine, and my parents found it. Least to say I couldn't play video games or go out with my friends for a while. I would become known as the kid who you'd go talk to if you felt shit about your test results, because I was always going to be lower in grade. But worst of all, I couldn't do the things I loved, which was to play video games and to hang out with my friends. So I came up with a plan. What if I made my own reports? And from this began the Wolf of Wall Street era, or Wolf of High School era. We color matched the paper exactly to the color of the reports. We scanned in numerous documents and edited them in Microsoft Paint. We spent weeks formulating the perfect replica of our official school report. It seemed like a perfect plan, and the next day we went to school to show all our friends the fruits of our labors. And it blew up. Everyone wanted one. People were going crazy that we matched it so well. And so over the next few weeks, we mass produced these fake reports and went home to our parents. They'd never smiled so much from a report card, but we had even bigger smiles. My parents, after seeing this report, bless their souls, thought I was a genius and were over the moon. And I thought that was the end of the story. But my parents decided they wanted the best for me, so without me knowing, they applied me to one of the top schools in the state, and a very official government process began. Meanwhile, I was blissful. I was back to playing video games, and at school I was resigned to the fact that I was just dumb. One day I remember coming home and my mum hugged me at the door and gave me an envelope full of money and told me congratulations. And I stopped and asked her for what. She exuberantly told me that I had been accepted into one of the top schools in the state, and this is where the dark times began. Things started to move very quickly. I insisted to my parents not to move my schools, but they wanted the best for me academically. They even went and bought my new school uniform. I even had a meeting with the new school principal, and I was all but a few days away from being transferred. My dinky fake Microsoft Paint school report had somehow passed through the very official education government filters and gotten me a place in this school. I remember telling my friends and they couldn't stop laughing. I was such an idiot and I was in way too deep. So I did the only thing I could do to make things right. I walked into my principal's office and told her everything. That I spent weeks making, curating, and editing fake reports. Her mouth hit the floor so hard I could feel the ground shake. She called my parents to break the news, and that was it. The other school said they weren't going to accept me, and my principal said she wasn't going to expel me because I fessed up myself. And I learned an important lesson that day. That telling the truth saved me a lot of pain that my lies had caused. It was a dark period of my teenage years. Now, not only was I a dropkick, but I was a liar and a cheater, and people looked at me differently for it. Just imagine the kid in your school that everyone say, wow, he's going to end up in jail or homeless. Yeah, that was me. So after a slew of unfortunate things, my girlfriend at the time breaking up with me and school becoming more strict with me, putting me on a list of at-risk teenagers, I was finally fed up. I hated people treating me like I had no potential and that I was the dumb, dangerous kid. I hated lying to my family and letting them down. I hated not being the best version of myself. And so I did something I hadn't done for a very long time. I took stock of where I actually was in life and where I wanted to be. I was more honest with not only others, but myself too. I remember very distinctly thinking to myself, okay, Hamza, what's the hardest thing you can think of that you could achieve? And at that time, it was to become a doctor. It ticked the boxes for me of helping people, making good money, and there was an idea of the sort of person I could become if I became a doctor. Kinder, more honest, intelligent, and earnest. And so began the climb. To get into medicine, I needed to be at the top, not only of my school, but in the state. And the only issue was that I genuinely had no idea how to get there. And as a young 16-year-old, I had very little life experiences to pull motivation from. One day in chemistry class, I decided I was going to stop sitting in the back, chatting with my friends, and instead sit in the first row next to the top students in the class. My teacher walked in that day and looked aghast. With her was another chemistry teacher who walked up to me, pointed and said to her, "He's going to be one of your top chemistry students." The class laughed and thought what a funny thing to say to the kid who was at the bottom of the class. But her kind words lit up something in me. She believed in me, and I didn't want to let her down. I didn't want to let myself down anymore. My teacher then said to me, "You're going to sit next to the top student for the rest of the year now." And thank God I did. I hated that kid. He was smart and arrogant and he knew it. But I knew that I needed to learn from him as much as I could about how successful people worked. And I learned a lot. The more people tried to put me down as being the dumb kid, the more it fueled the fire in me. Every day I'd go home and watch motivational YouTube videos to pump me up. Eric Thomas, Tony Robbins, Les Brown. I would know all of their talks off by heart because I figured the more I listened to their encouraging words, the less I'll hear the discouraging words in my own mind. People at school started to see how hard I was working. It was unusual for everyone to see me so serious, when for 4 years I was the joker of the grade. I wanted so deeply to succeed and show everyone that they were wrong about me. I needed to improve my ranking in the grade, otherwise I wouldn't be allowed to go into the higher maths class which I needed to get into medicine. English came easy to me and so I improved quite quickly with it, but maths was my Achilles heel. My brain just couldn't flow with it. I put in hours and hours at home trying to solve maths equations and doing all the homework the teachers assigned, trying to hone this craft. By the end of year 11, I had moved from a kid who was at the bottom of all his subjects to now a below average student. I had improved, yes, but I still wasn't at the top of the grade, and more importantly, I was still near the bottom of the maths ranking. This becomes important later in the story. Year 12 began and suddenly everything became much realer. Teachers who were normally jovial and friendly suddenly became solemn and serious. We were told over and over, this is the most important year of your life. It really isn't, but at the time it felt like it was true. I applied myself to be put into the top maths class in the school. It was called 4-unit maths. It was renowned for being grueling and tough, even for the prodigies of maths. I had no business applying for a class like that, especially when my rank in less difficult maths classes was so low. But I applied nonetheless. The maths faculty immediately refused to allow me to enter this class as they said I would drag down the more brilliant students with my poor grades. I again insisted that I wanted to do this class to the point where my parents were called in to have a meeting with the head of maths. Even still, at the meeting, I told my parents and the head teacher, I will do this class, and so they permitted me entry with a condition. If I did not keep up my test scores with the others, they would kick me out. I gulped and agreed. I remember going home and crying angry tears. I was so ashamed that I literally had to beg to be put into this high achievers class. I was pissed. I didn't want to be seen as someone to be pitied or someone who would drag others down. So I buckled in for the most arduous and rigorous months that I had experienced up until that point in my life. Many months later, in that maths class, we were all receiving our test scores back. And it was about halfway through the year and I had been keeping up my grades with the other students in the class. I looked around and everyone was slowly receiving their test results, some happy, some sad, and I sat there anxiously awaiting for my own, until finally everyone had received their test but mine. My heart sank. My thoughts were going crazy. Why haven't I gotten my test back? Was my score that bad that the teacher had to give it to me in private? Was he about to kick me out? The teacher called to attention the class and stated with a loud, clear voice, and lastly, to the top grade of the year, the person who scored 100% in a 4-unit maths test, and he placed the test paper on my table. The class started clapping and the teacher said he was shocked and proud of my performance, but I couldn't hear anything. I was too numb. I went from thinking I was about to be kicked out to topping the grade in a class that I wasn't even allowed to be in. That was the first time in a long time that I saw my potential and what I could achieve with hard work. The rest of the year was a haze of working long hours and skipping many social events. I eventually graduated with one of the top overall scores in my school, being put in the top 1% of the state. but that still wasn't enough for entry into medicine. Unfortunately, I was abysmal at the medical admission test called UMAT. And so I entered the next stage, to go into a bachelor degree of medical sciences. I chose this degree because out of the 300 or so students in the course, the top 10 would be chosen to be transferred directly into medicine. But it was a long and taxing process. You didn't have to work hard for a year now, you had to grind for the whole 3-year degree. I remember the first day of university, the professor asked the auditorium of 300 or so students to put up their hands if they wanted to get into medicine after medical science. Almost every single hand went up in that room. I looked around and thought, how the hell am I supposed to be in the top 10 of this? I was terrified. Luckily, I found a group of like-minded people and our days became easy in medical science. We all wanted to get into medicine, but we also joked around and were laid back. It made the hyper-competitive atmosphere of MedSci less toxic, and I genuinely think having good friends during that time made me be where I am today. We would study hard and constantly be making jokes in class. I felt like I had found my people. I was reconciling the Hamza from high school who was the joker, but also the Hamza who worked hard. I was happy. The end goal of medicine was still important to me, but I was deeply content with the people I was surrounded by. They became my best friends, and I wanted us all to get into medicine together. We attempted the UMAT again, and I failed again, adding injury to the wound caused by the last failed attempt. I began to doubt my self-worth and think of myself as a failure, thinking that I would never get into medicine. I looked around and saw some of the exceptional people in our cohort had passed the UMAT test with flying colors and were able to skip having to be in the top 10 in medical science and gain direct entry into medicine. Some of them more lazy than me with worse grades in university than me, but because they were naturally gifted, they had better aptitude to apply in the UMAT test and they were able to gain entry into medicine. I was jealous. I wished that was me. I wanted with every fiber of my being to be in medical school. I wanted to feel successful, to feel like I was someone important. And I felt like a nobody at that time. I told myself I was the dumb kid who was hiding among the smart kids, and the only thing that kept me hidden was to continue working as hard as I could to keep up to them. 2 failed attempts later into medical school, and on my 3rd attempt at UMAT, I scored a very average score, but an improvement from my previous ones. I was then offered an interview for a spot of potential students who would be chosen to go into medicine. 60 students were offered interviews, and from that 10 would be chosen to go into medicine. And of all the students interviewed, my UMAT score was the lowest, but luckily for me, they scored you based on 3 things: uni grades, UMAT, and interview. And the interview is where I shined. A few months later, I lay in my bed while on semester break, opening my phone to a Gmail alert. I read the email twice over to make sure it was real and I had read it correctly. Congratulations, you have been successfully accepted into UNSW Medicine. I normally never screamed or was overly excited about things, but I ran out of my room and screamed to my mum and brother, I made it, I made it. I remember just feeling so overwhelmingly grateful that day. I didn't feel like I deserved this gift because I knew so many others who worked just as hard as myself or harder, but weren't in my position. I thought about where I came from, I thought about who I was and who I'm becoming. And it was just a moment I'll never forget. I entered med school in 2018 and finished in 2020, working my first year as a junior doctor in 2021 during the pandemic, with many, many challenging and difficult stories that I'll share for another time. I learned many things on the journey of becoming a doctor, some private, some public failures, but you easily forget to commend yourself along the way. Of all the things you have overcome and achieved, I try to remind myself these struggles that felt earth-shattering at the time, I have now overcome. The thing is, you can't see the vision of your future self where you'll be successful or achieve the goal. All you see in the moment is the past and the present, where you haven't succeeded yet, and so then you feel like a failure. The belief that got me through those difficult times was to have this core unshakable resolve that I will achieve this goal no matter what. No matter how many attempts it takes, no matter how many years it takes, I would rather die than not succeed at this goal. And it was that mentality, which sure might be toxic, but helped me attain the goal ultimately. I'll leave you with this quote that makes me feel grateful in difficult times. 5 years ago, you dreamed about where you are now. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.